Hi, welcome to the Duff-Court Urban Farm. I'm going to give you a tour. So in the garden you're going to notice a couple things. We have vertical growing on the fences. So right now we have beans, we had cucumbers, but the cucumbers are no longer there because we plant in successions. So once one of the plants no longer provides, then we actually pull it and we put something else. You'll also notice that we have a row cover. So we grow beets and we grow Swiss chard under the row covers because we don't use pesticides. Therefore, in order to prevent leaf miners from getting into these plants, we actually put a row cover. And it's actually been very helpful because we don't have leaf miners. They don't get under our row covers. You'll also notice in the front, we have carrots as well. So here we have different layers of a garden where we have the vertical gardening. We have things that are growing above the ground, like the Swiss chard, and then we have beets and we have carrots growing in the ground. So we're trying to use as many of the dimensions of the space that we can. So we're growing our tomatoes vertically. Some of them actually have vertical trellises. Others have strings that we've attached to grow the tomatoes vertically. And in some cases, we're actually kind of growing our tomatoes diagonally, just to give them more space for them to grow. So here tomatoes grow like vines, and if we could actually get the vines to elongate as much as possible, we're going to get a lot of fruit out of it. One thing that we do also in our beds is we don't plant the same thing in the same location. So if we had arugula in this location, well then the next succession is going to be something different. So we always mix it up as much as we can. So you'll notice on this side of the bed we have tomatoes in the middle, then we have basil, and we also have lettuce as well. One issue that we've had with the lettuce is that a little bit of our lettuce has been munched on by birds. And what we've noticed actually is that on one side of the fence we had peas up until the middle of the summer, and when the peas no longer were productive, we actually pulled the pea plants, and the next succession that we planted was cucumbers. But as soon as we pulled the peas, the birds started to eat our lettuce. So what we noticed in our garden is that actually the way that we manipulate the garden, then the insects and the wildlife also adapt to the way that we're doing our garden, and sometimes it creates problems, but in other cases sometimes it alleviates some of the issues as well. So on this side of the garden we have a mix of arugula right now. So this is arugula. This is quite fast growing, grows really well in the shade, and does not get munched on like the lettuce does by the birds. So you'll notice in this garden bed we have carrots that we've just planted recently. But we also have green onions that are going to be ready fairly soon. Under the row cover here we have beets still, and we have carrots still continuing on this row. But here we have kale. So this kale we planted in the spring, probably in the month of March even, and has been growing ever since. Some of it's actually getting too large for our row cover. This is why we've actually planted kale in some of the other garden beds, because we're going to be removing some of this kale and just allowing it to grow in other areas of the garden. So our beans have been extremely productive this year, and they're continuing to grow. So you'll notice actually the plants have grown all the way to the top, and some of them are actually circling back down and are actually still producing flowers. Other things that you'll notice, we have more tomato plants, different varieties of tomatoes, cherry tomatoes. We have orange tomatoes. In this bed here, instead of putting tomatoes in the middle, we planted tomatillos. And on the other side, we have carrots and nasturtiums in the front of the bed. But tomatillos get very large and they take up a lot of space. So we figured we would plant them in a couple locations in the garden, but mainly planted them outside of the garden. Other things that are interesting in our garden bed is that we have a lot of dill. So dill's been really beneficial for us because it's actually attracted parasitic wasps. It's actually attracted pollinators. It smells really great, and right now it's going to seed. So some of these seeds we've actually seeded in different areas of our garden for next year, or even for this year. Some of it we've actually given to volunteers, and we've given to people to use as spices. So dill seed is really tasty. It could be used for pickling. It could be used as garnishes for salads. And we've let a couple of dill grow throughout our garden. So some interesting things that we've planted is actually here we have some Brussels sprouts. So we've started some winter crops, or fall crops, I guess. These are Brussels sprouts. Right now they're planted pretty close together. We didn't call any back at this point. So we're going to let them go. I could see some of them are being munched on right now. So if they get too crowded, we might call some back. But yeah, we've got Brussels sprouts as our new crop for our fall crop. We also have some really nice peppers that are developing as well. So you'll notice here we have a yellow pepper that's turning pretty yellow presently. A couple places in the garden we've actually let amaranth grow. So this is amaranth. We don't want it to get too big because amaranth could be a really big plant. So we keep harvesting it, we bring some to the market, and we give some to volunteers. In this section where we stopped producing peppers and eggplants, you'll notice actually there's a bunch of different varieties of kale. So we have Bates kale and Lachine kale. And also we've left some of the coriander go to seed. So we don't always let our spices go to seeds, but in this case here we did it with this one. It's really beautiful flowers, attracts pollinators, as well as coriander seeds are starting to be produced right here. So this is sorrel, and it's the red vein sorrel. This is a perennial, it comes back every year, kind of like a lemony version of spinach. In this bed we grew broccoli, and broccoli, the main heads of broccoli have been harvested already, but we haven't cut back the plant yet. We're actually still producing leaves, and as you can see we have offshoots of the heads that are still being produced as well. So they're not as big as the main head that developed, but we are still getting little bunches of broccolis that are popping out. A good way to prevent the birds from eating our lettuce is actually providing a row cover. And actually, as we see here, the lettuce is growing pretty well. It's not getting attacked by the birds like the other one was. So here the lettuce is growing pretty well from the center, as you could see, and we're getting better results. So in the corners of the beds, we planted some squash. Squash gets really big, and we didn't want to actually have it in the main beds, so we planted it in the corners and grew some up the fence, but also let some run outside of the garden. We have butternut squash that's actually growing right in here. We also have mint in the corner. So we have different varieties of mint. So this section of our garden is more of the perennial section. In the back, we have different varieties of black raspberries, an apple tree, a plum tree, different varieties of berries and currants and other flowers as well. So here we have a strawberry patch. We actually have a lot of fruit growing presently. On this side, we have a goji berry bush, as well as another haskap bush in the back also. So on this side of the garden, we planted a lot of extra plants that we had. So we were running out of room and space in the main garden. And we actually had access to a geotextile that we put on the ground. And we actually just cut holes and planted all of the plants that we had left over. So these plants here were grown from seed, and we overplanted because we wanted to make sure that the plants survived and we had enough for the garden. In this section we also planted our squash. So we have butternut squash mainly growing in this section here. And as you can see, it gets really big and quite invasive in a regular garden. So we put it on the outside and just let it grow along the sides here. Another plant that we have here as well, this is a perennial plant. This is called Lovage. It is a plant that actually tastes like celery, but is a really intense flavor of celery. But it's good in soups, it's good in salads, and we have that growing here on the outside as well. And at the end we have our composter. We're trying to generate as much soil as we can, and hopefully we'll be using that in our gardens next year.